Some warriors are born on battlefields. Others are forged in silence behind locked doors in places where war is waged not with weapons, but with will. This is chapter 5. From Abuse to Abundance, the warrior was born. They say trauma breaks you, shatters you into pieces so small you'll never find them all again. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes in those broken places, something else emerges, something unbreakable, something that refuses to die. This isn't a story about what was done to me. This is a story about what happened inside of me, about the moment when survival became more than just staying alive, when it became an act of rebellion, when breathing itself became a revolution. You see, when warriors aren't always made in victory, sometimes they're born in moments of absolute darkness when every cell in your body screams, enough, even as your voice remains silent. When you learn to build fortresses in your mind that no one can breach. When you discover that even in captivity, there are parts of you that can never be captured. This is the chapter where fear met its match, where the victim became the survivor, where the prey became the predator of her own demons. This is where the warrior was born. Welcome back to my book, From Abuse to Abundance. This is chapter 5. And before we get into it, a couple of exciting announcements. First thing is, for every Apple podcast review, written review that is done, I will be donating $100 to an animal charity or organization that are tirelessly helping the wildlife and domestic animals that have been misplaced and injured from these horrific Los Angeles wildfires. So all you need to do is leave a written review on Apple. You can be anonymous or you can leave your name. I would also appreciate you shouting out the show. That'd be wonderful if you share your review or you share this episode, this book, if you're really loving it, on your Instagram stories, Facebook stories, TikTok. If you can't listen on Apple, like you have no way to do it, you're a diehard Spotify or YouTube listener of mine, you can take a screenshot of the show. You can tap the 5 stars on Spotify and share the show, and I will count that as a review towards the $100 donation. Okay. I know how many of you feel helpless right now and want to be able to do something. And so this is one way that we can give back. And I'm not putting any limit on the number of reviews. So if you have friends and family that you want to share the show with and they can leave the review, or people in your team, people in your organization, there is truly no cap on the donation I'm making. And I will be tracking those donations and sharing them in my Instagram stories at ProjectME with Tiffany. So I have great news for those of you who've been wanting to work with me privately at my highest level. My 2-month private business coaching program applications are open for a very short period of time. So you want to be able to work with me to develop and execute a profitable content strategy for your business so you know exactly what to post in both video and written form. This also includes emails to create consistent clients and sales. We will repackage your offers or package new offers so that you have the messaging down. You know how to share and showcase those offers so people are excited to buy from you instead of giving you excuses. We also will fine tune your brand and business using my emotional based sales techniques to compel, not convince, the right people to buy from you on repeat. So everything I teach you and we create in my 2-month program is designed to get you to $25,000 to $27,000 months if you're starting from zero. If you're looking to scale past $300,000 a year, I take my established entrepreneurs through a more sophisticated funnel strategy and my $1 million proven launch formula to scale your profits to the millions. You're using the same application regardless of where you're at in your business. I've done this to keep it simple. Okay. So these applications will not be open long. I only take a maximum of 4 private clients at a time. And once I go into launch mode for my signature group coaching program, Selling with Soul, and that is coming up the end of February, early March, I will not be taking any private clients at all. So it will be closed for quite some time. You can swipe up the app up is inside the show notes. It's in the description here on YouTube. Please note, this is not in my link in bio on social media, okay? This is the only way for you to be accessing this application. While most people would be upset in the situation that I was in going from middle school to high school, I was actually thrilled. By the time eighth grade ended, I had created a solid group of friends. Like, and that felt really good to me, where I could depend on them. I loved going over to their families' houses to escape mine. We spent countless hours at the mall. We played Uno for hours and ate frozen pizza. However, in the school system I was in, there was a split that was going to occur for high school, where 80% of my middle school was going to one and 20% to the other. I was in the 20%. Sadly, all of my friends, except for one, went to the other school. And I was nervous about that. I knew I would be kind of starting from scratch. And then there was another part of me that felt like it was a new beginning. High school is going to be better. Middle school was so rough if you've listened to the other chapters for a million different reasons. And I was like, okay, I'll be able to escape this class slut, a whole persona that I have been given and this reputation going to high school, since so many of the people who were extra mean to me and the bullies were going to the other school. So that was the part of me that was relieved. At this point, I had started getting really angry. I started just loathing my mom and the situation I was in. I started to wake up a little bit to understanding that what was happening to me was not normal. So an internal mechanism shifted in me at a certain point, and it did happen in eighth grade, but it really didn't surface into full embodiment until the summer before freshman year. And it was when we had someone come speak to our class who was Deborah Norville. And I've always wanted to have her on the podcast, and I've never pitched her to be on the show. And I think she would absolutely come on. She really did change my life. And if you've watched that show, Inside Edition, she is the host of it still to this day. And that was a really hot show at the time. And she got pulled up in a limo, which I thought was so cool. And she spoke to the class, the eighth grade class, and she was so confident and poised. And I was so mesmerized by the fact that not just that all the students locked in and paid attention to her, but the adults, you could tell, respected her and paid attention to her and really listened to her. And I wanted that. And from that day forward, I wanted to be a TV newscaster. I wanted to be a truth teller. I wanted people to listen to me. And it makes sense. I wanted the truth exposed. I wanted to report the facts. I wanted to be heard because I wasn't, right? Of course, I didn't realize all those dynamics at the time. But when a Virgo gets fixated on wanting something, it is very hard to unlock from that. And I didn't. And so that was kind of the first time I had a sense of the future, something I wanted to be, something I could really glom onto, something I could fantasize and dream about, which is a beautiful safety and survival mechanism that I've learned that happens with people. And it's fantasy thinking, right? It's even somewhat delusional, to the point where I could sit there and daydream about, when I would watch Inside Edition, and that was going to be me behind the desk, and what would I report on, and what would I say, and what would I wear, and what would my hair look like? And I didn't run around telling everybody this is what I wanted to do. It was more so like, I'm going to do it. It wasn't even a, I hope to do this someday. It was, I am doing this. This is my way to have the truth come out. And it was really strong within me. That summer before freshman year is when I officially took my freedom back in a lot of ways. It's when I first started sneaking out of my house. And I grew up in a ranch style house. And the bedroom that I ended up in after my mom's third husband was kicked out of the house, I got his office. And it was very easy to sneak out of. I mean, it was made to sneak out of. And the exhilaration of being able to do something like that. And I didn't have to ask permission, and no one knew where I was. And it was like a prisoner escaping, but not paying a consequence for it. Oh, it was an internal drugstore high that I remember like it was yesterday. And I started to sneak out and with people who were already in high school. Of course, I had an attraction to bad boys. I had an attraction to rebels. I had an attraction to people who also probably were from highly dysfunctional households who were like, fuck it. We're going to do whatever the hell we want to do. Almost like a sea of, teen pirates. I loved knowing that when that main abuser, I would have to interact with him and be abused by him. And that was ongoing and regular and almost daily, 7 days a week. And then dealing with my mom. I had my own secrets. One, I was going to be a truth telling newscaster. Two, I was sneaking out later that night, or I snuck out the night before and I drank, or I partied, or I made out with a boy, or I did like nothing. I went to Denny's at like 2 in the morning or whatever. And I liked knowing I had my thing. And this rebellion in me was born, it was brewing. And I entered high school with a lot of insecurity, right? I'd no self worth, but I started to learn how to mask, as it is called in the therapy world today, and create a persona to where I could come across as though I was confident and not to fuck with me. I would study other people who I saw that were confident, including when I watched Deborah Norville. They stood up straight. They had a certain tone of their voice. They were able to look people in their eyes. They walked a certain way. They would raise their hand first in class. They wouldn't be afraid to go to the front of the class or to talk in class. And so I started mimicking that as truly a form of compensating for I was a piece of shit and not worthy to be in this world. And my false self really started to be highly developed, and it also served me. So you would hear lots of teachers, you would hear adults, clients of my mom's, even friends' parents. Tiffany is so mature for her age. Tiffany is so well spoken. Tiffany is like a little adult, which I now know that many people who have endured abuse or came from high trauma households, this is a common thing that is said because you have to fend for yourself. You have to be an adult. You have to be hyper vigilant. You have to be taking care of yourself. You have to be watching what's going on. You have to be pleasing the people around you in order to stay safe and be a step ahead at all times. And so that's exactly what I did. But my freshman year was not what I hoped it would be. There was a gang of bullies, female bullies, that were far worse than middle school that someone knew someone and told them that I was the slut of my middle school. And they were relentless. I mean, these girls were horrible, and I couldn't get away from it. It became a major thing that involved like even the superintendent of like the school system. It was such a thing to where my mom and my dad, who was obviously divorced from my mom, came up with a solution of me going to boarding school. And I was not upset with this idea, by the way. It was exhausting attending freshman year. Now, I did meet and make some new friends who one of them I'm still friends with, to this day, and other people I do keep in touch with. So it wasn't like it was all miserable, but how that school worked in that area, and I know a lot of schools sadly still operate this way, is it was segregated by tables. And it really was like, there was really like the mean girls. Remember that movie Heathers? There was like that kind of crowd, like the ultra popular girls. There was the Christian table. There was the Jew tables. There was the jock table. There was the Land of the Misfit tables. And I wanted to be at the Jew table because my Jews are what helped save me and made me feel safe and nurtured. I grew up in an area that had a heavy amount of Jews, and I mean, significant, like 70 to 80%. Like I was going to multiple bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs every weekend. And I felt such a sense of community and family, and I wanted to be part of it, and I wanted to sit at that table. And once in a while I could, but it wasn't a vibe. I really wasn't supposed to be sitting there. And I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere, right? I didn't have a place. I did competitive dance and there wasn't a table for that. And so truly the place that I felt the safest, which was actually a table in a separate lunchroom. It was like the smaller, weird lunchroom, not the main room where like the cafeteria was. This is the land of the misfit people, which is why I always say inside my Project Me Posse business and money coaching membership, we're the land of the misfit toys here in a endearing way because we're the people who never felt like we fit in. We're the people that always felt different, think differently, speak differently, maybe look differently, challenge the norm, the creatives of the world, the artsy people. That's who was in that lunchroom. And I felt the most accepted by these people, even though I really didn't fit in there either. I did not have a different color in my hair. I didn't have piercings. I wasn't sitting there with a sketchbook and like this talented artist, or I didn't play some instrument. Like I truly didn't fit in, but knowing I was accepted really meant more to me than any of those people could ever realize, which is why it's so important to me in my business and with everyone who's listening to this book and listening to this podcast that I have a safe space for people who feel heard, seen, understood, and expected. And that is where the posse membership in this beautiful community was born. Is there are a lot of us. I didn't realize that growing up, how many of us felt like the black sheep, the outsiders, that no one really understood us. And I was always wearing these multiple masks to try to fit in wherever I was, which is really people pleasing because that is what felt so safe. But ultimately, it was very clear, I am assuming, especially to my mother, my dad was kind of out to lunch. You know, he was absent, but not absent because he didn't want to spend time or see me or love me. Almost like emotionally incapable, emotionally distant, disconnected, almost like a permanent state of dissociation. My guess is this was as a result of being married to a narcissist, and everything that happened is all I can imagine. So, and I wasn't allowed to see him much. So I don't think he was aware of fully what was going on. He was taking her word for it. But she wasn't wrong saying I'm in the, I'm ending up in the wrong crowd, blah, 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 because the last thing a narcissist wants is for a school to be calling and it being a problem. That's not a good look. So I ended up going to a boarding school. Now, this boarding school, think Gossip Girl, if you've seen that show, okay? Total Gossip Girl vibes was this boarding school. And this boarding school, you could either be a boarder student or you could be a day student. What I didn't realize when I was excited to go somewhere different, somewhere many cities away, to get away from this reputation, maybe this was the place for me where I could start fresh. I was excited by it, but what I didn't realize is that it would be a tool that my mom used over my head to threaten to board me there, to where I'd have to like live there. And I'm going to be straight up. I did not meet any students, and maybe there are some that went to different boarding schools. I don't know, but I don't remember any boarding students that were like, yes, I get to live in the dorms here and I'm not living at home. Maybe there were some, even though my home environment was so abusive, I still didn't want to live in those dorms. These were not like luxurious dorms, okay? Like it wasn't that kind of vibe. It was more like a very strict disciplinarian type environment. I'll put it to you that way. And so I remember showing up at this school and immediately, day one, I was very popular with the boys. I was fresh meat. I was the new girl. Well, that did not make a lot of the other girls who were already kind of in that private school system from even grade school and middle school, which, yes, those exist. So they already knew each other. All these rich families knew each other. And that was not exactly welcomed by these girls. And there were mean girls there too. You can't get away from these people. There were mean guys as well in this school. But I still was happy that I could create a new reputation. And thank God that slut reputation didn't somehow follow me there. I developed a different reputation. As you can imagine, I am being regularly dropped off and or picked up by Adam, by the main abuser. I have a driver. This is not unusual in a boarding school for students who don't have a car to have a driver. I would say a majority of people who were day students did have like parents that dropped them off, but it wasn't like weird or shocking to anybody, especially because I referred to him as like my brother or my adopted brother because I knew I had to make normal of it. And I was happier when he was typically it was him picking me up from school. And I was happy because it was a reprieve from my mom. Being driven to school by her, that was a long ass time to be captured in a car with her, especially when she was in one of her moods, which that could change on a dime, that could change on a day. You never knew what you were going to get. And typically, those car rides were some form of me not being good enough, me needing to be this, me needing to be that. Even if it was said in a nicer way, it was like I've got to do more, I've got to be more. This has to happen when you get home. There was just a lot of that. I had no buffer. It's not like there was a sibling in the car and this was never going to be a carpool mom situation. And I did make some great friends, thank God, in high school. And what was so great about that boarding school is there were students from all over the world, and there were what was called, I don't know if they're called this now, I think it's kind of fucked up. They're called scholarship students. So in private schools in the US, you have to have a certain percentage of scholarship students where they're not paying. And of course, what do I gravitate to? Once again, I gravitate to the people who are the outsiders. You know, one of my dear best friends from high school, and I'm going to cry. I hope she's listening to it. I won't say her name out of respect, but she's Muslim. So she was an outsider, right? And even though she's still stunning, but stunning, brilliant, athletic, that just made people hate her more. And also didn't like that she was Muslim, right? So, like, these are the people I was friends with. There was this guy, I'll say his first name because I actually do want to find him and I cannot remember his last name. His name is Brett. And he was definitely an outsider. And where we ate lunch was literally like, if those of you in the US probably know, like TGIF Fridays, it was literally like a restaurant. I mean, this wasn't a cheap boarding school where you had booths. I mean, this food was like delish. You had a pasta bar. You didn't have people waiting on you, but I mean, but kind of. I mean, it was legit. The food was way better in my boarding school than in college. And I did get so stressed out when it was my lunch period. Everyone had different lunch periods because how boarding school was set up is it's a college preparatory school. So it is structured just like college where people start their classes at different times, end their day at different times, have breaks at different times, lunch at different times, have study hall at different times. Even you could end up be playing sports during the day. Like it's all over the place. And I never always knew for sure on any given day who was going to be in the lunch area. So it wasn't like, oh, good, I can eat lunch with so and so every day. Like it was so stressful for me because I really had no self worth, right? I was all masking everything. So I had to pretend like I didn't give any fucks, right? Like not the ZFG that I teach now. Like it was a fake version of if I was sitting alone or if I had to like try to get myself to slide into a table that like probably didn't really want me there wasn't a great feeling. But a lot of times, this guy, Brett, for whatever reason, we had similar schedules and he sat alone. He seemed like he sat alone with no problem. Like he was proud of it. Like almost like he didn't want to fucking sit with anyone. Like he was like the rebel, like I don't want to be here. I think all these people are bullshit and I don't even want to talk to them. And I would sit with him and he was so accepting and he felt really safe to me. And he was one of the first like males, even though obviously he was like my age, that felt really safe to me. And he was, whereas so many weren't, which I'm about to tell you what happened that first year in boarding school. And so I started my heavy partying and intensified sneaking out that really just kept like a ball of snow going down a hill. Like it was that angry, rebellious, bad girl thing. This just took on a life of its own, right? Like the more I did it, the more I wanted it. The more it escalated, the older I got, then I started, right? Like experiencing what it felt like to be buzzed. And that was an escape, experiencing what it was like to be, high and do weed and experience. And it felt great to escape. And it felt great to be able to laugh and not be worried and have like all these hours of time in the middle of the night, not worried that someone was going to abuse me, because I felt like I had some sense of control. And then I made sure I was friends or dated people who were 16 or older so they would have cars to pick me up. when I did what I called were sneak out plans, which I still joke now with some of my friends from high school who remember that. Like, I had my voicemail, there was literally on my voicemail, I had code words for if you want to have, and I don't remember what my code word was, but it was a code word for sneak out plans. So like if you want to basically have sneak out plans, leave me a message and a time or something like that. I mean, it is kind of funny when you think about it. Like it's absolutely ridiculous. And of course, I perfectly timed like a song like Cypress Hill or something in the background, like Insane in the Membrane, or I had something going in the background that like went with all of it. And so I was hooking up with guys at a very young age. So I lost my virginity at 15 and I lost my virginity to someone who was 21. Now, I want to say a little more about that. Clearly, I lost my virginity involuntarily at a much younger age. So this was me voluntarily losing my virginity. And a lot happened when I was 15. I can't remember how I met this guy, this 21-year-old. He was very attractive, major fucking bad boy, had a really fun sports car, had a music shop in downtown Chicago. It was very, all of it was very cool. I lied to him about my age, which is why we don't need to hate on him. He did not know. And I was very fucking believable because I was so well trained at lying at this point because I was groomed to do it. I was taught to do it. I was required to do it. So even though I had clear braces, he didn't know. He thought I was a senior in high school until this night. So he would pick me up. I'd sneak out the window. I had a fake ID at 15 with the braces, but I made sure to smile without showing my teeth. And it was a good fake ID. It was quite superior, actually. And I was good at acting that part. So I was going to the clubs in Chicago and like raves and shit at 15 regularly. I'm talking like high end clubs as well. I remember there was this club Crowbar in Chicago. That was like the hot spot. And I didn't pass inside the club a lot of times to like the people in the club. Like there would be guys like, you are way too young to be here. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? And I met him and he would pick me up in his sports car. He was out of control. He was drunk driving. We got into a major accident on a major freeway during my sneak out plans. Thankfully, he gave a shit enough and told me, I remember it like it was yesterday because we remember those traumatic events like that, where he was losing control of this car. He had a stick shift and he knew he was losing it and he yelled to put on my seatbelt. And I did it and I did it quick. And thank God we spun around. And just the way the car spun and hit things, it didn't make direct impact on any one spot, which is why we're alive. And the car was like barely drivable, but he was able to get it off of a freeway exit. Of course, within like literally seconds after that, we were getting pulled over. And he goes, "You're my cousin." That maybe is a tell that maybe there's part of him who knew I wasn't 18. I don't know. It could also be he was protecting me because he knew I was sneaking out my window and he knew how strict my mom was. And so I, of course, played that part to the officer. And I was shitting during this, not because we almost died, but because I couldn't get caught. This was my only form of freedom was me being able to sneak out. And this would be ruined. I mean, I would have bars on my windows, get without a doubt. And that is what I was most concerned about. I put on a great performance. He was drinking. Like he was definitely drunk driving. I don't know how he got out of it. He was pretty charming himself. It was it was God, honestly. It had to have been because this was without a doubt insane. And we some I think it ended up taking like a taxi, so I had to take a taxi back to my house to then sneak back in my window. And I mean, next day I was like beat up. I didn't have like any visible bruises, but like I was in a major car accident and I couldn't tell anybody about it. I was like, thank God I didn't have like internal bleeding. And that was insane. And then he picked me up other times. I lost my virginity to him. And this is a little graphic, but I do think it's an important part of the story. And I wanted to. I really liked him. I felt safe with him, even though he was drinking and driving, like he had my back. He always got me back home. I don't know. I felt safe. And we had sex, and I didn't bleed, and he knew I was a virgin. And I believed I was a virgin because I was so dissociated from what was happening at home. And so I was telling him I was a virgin, all the things, like it wasn't BS. And he had obviously been with people who were virgins before and was like, he was pissed. Like, even before we were done, he stopped having sex with me and was like, "You're lying. You're not a virgin. What is going on?" And I was like, "I am, I swear." And I go, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "You're not bleeding at all." And I didn't know that virgins bled. Like, I wasn't taught any of this shit. There wasn't social media to teach me this. Like, I didn't know this. And I was so young, I didn't have a bunch of friends who were having sex. And I'm sure there were people, but I didn't have any. And he explained it to me, and I was like, I made up something on the spot, like, oh, well, I've done horseback riding, or, probably from a tampon, or I said something. He really wasn't buying it, but he like kind of went along with it, but he wasn't happy with me. And then he was like, "How old are you?" And the whole cat came out of the bag that night. And I ended up telling him the truth. And he was like, "Oh my God." He was like, "I could get like arrested for this. You realize that? Like, this is insane." And he was bothered by himself, but why I'm sharing that story isn't about him. That was the night that I really realized that I wasn't a virgin. It was the veil of denial was punctured. It was removed. It was it was gone. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that I knew that, because that made the abuse I was enduring really real, and that would puncture all the lies I needed to tell myself and needed to believe in order to survive, in order to even maintain my relationship with Adam, the relationship of what I really wanted it to be versus the reality. And so from that point on, I used anything I could to push that ball back under the water to make sure it didn't pop up. So the partying increased. I can't even tell you how many guys I slept with. Whatever I could do to be distracted and dissociated, anything. I had to be constantly busy. I had to have plans for plans. I had to be sneaking out. I had to be obsessive over certain things. That's when my workout addiction started. Like I got obsessive with that. Anything to make it so I couldn't feel, and I didn't even have a second to reflect on what was going on. And then the next thing happened at 15. Wow, was that a turning point of a year where I really knew and had proof that pretty much I was fucked in life. Like, that's when I was like, there isn't a God. I was questioning it already in middle school for obvious reasons. And then it was like, there's not a God. No one's got me. because this just keeps getting worse and more messed up. And I was allowed to date, which also sounds weird, even as I am sharing this, because obviously I was being sent out on dates regularly by my mom. But I'm talking dating by my own choice. And there was this guy. His first name is Jason. I won't say his last name. I do not want to get sued. And he was, of course, older because that was a kind of rule of mine. You had to have a car. And I believe he was like a senior. Like he was probably 17. I don't know if he was 18. He could have been. And I wouldn't say like he was my boyfriend, but we were dating. He went to a totally different high school, which was also a thing that I did. I think I did that in order to ensure I didn't get the slut reputation back in my current boarding school. Plus, the guys in my boarding school weren't bad enough for me. They weren't bad boy enough. They just weren't. They were a little too clean cut. I mean, I found a few like scholarship kids, don't get me wrong, but like I needed more danger than that. And so this guy, very good looking, dad, super rich, some kind of a contractor. I'm talking like probably the most obscene visual amount of wealth that I'd experienced. And keep in mind, I was wealthy. You know, I was in a wealthy household. And this was on like a whole nother level. I'm talking, this was one of those kids that had a living room in his own bedroom, like a full suite of a bedroom with one of those like giant wall TVs with all the video game systems and a leather couch and like crazy shit. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, wow, this is like a cool setup. I mean, he had like a Corvette or something as his car, you know? And so I thought it was be like cool to be like, you know, seen in that. And I didn't really like feel some kind of a connection to him. It didn't really fucking matter to me. I just needed to be constantly distracted. And he wasn't handsy or anything with me. And I probably hung out with him, I don't know, I would say at least 4 times. And we knew several mutual friends. And like the people who I met him through, I'd known for like a while. And there was nothing bad said about him. You know, it was more so people talked about like, how wealthy he is and how much money he has. And so this escalated to me doing sneak out plans because this kid had no curfew, nothing. Like his dad was almost never home. He had his own credit card. Like he could show up at like 3 in the morning and he wouldn't get in trouble. And so I knew in order to continue going out with him, of course, I had a solution, right? Like I'm able to go out at any time of night because I have sneak out plans. And so he picked me up this one night, and he had a friend of his in the car too, in his Corvette. And he said that there was a party that he was throwing in one of his dad's houses that was empty because they were getting ready to, it was going to be sold. And so he was having a house party, which his dad didn't know about, in this empty house. So it wasn't that nearby, if I recall. You know, it was like a 20-30 minute drive. And I was kind of excited. Like, this sounds fun. We stopped, we got alcohol. I don't know if you've ever heard of Mickey's. I mean, I've never drank one since. But I guess as I understand what Mickey's are, it's like what probably like malt beers are now or IPAs are now, where like the alcohol content per like a bottle of this is like equivalent to having like 3 normal beers. Okay. But I'd never heard of them in my life and picked that up. I hated beer, but as a good people pleaser, I would never have shared what I wanted. And I would never have said I didn't like beer because I didn't want to seem uncool. And I was being heavily encouraged to start drinking this beer in the car because we were nearby. And I was a little weird about that for obvious reasons. But of course, I did it. And we're in the house. And I remember feeling buzzed really quickly. And I was like, but I wasn't some big like drinker, at that point at 15. So I was like, that's weird. But I also like was probably starving myself and not eating. So I was not that concerned, but I remember getting buzzed really quickly. But I was like, maybe it's also these Mickeys. I've never had these before. And then he like strongly encouraged me to have like another and like wanted me to chug it. And I did my best to try to do that. And he's like, want to get a tour of the house? And I was like, sure. I thought the house was kind of a cool house, not as cool as his other one, but like, yeah, like give me a tour. And this other guy was downstairs, his other compadre, and there was no one else there yet. And I remember saying, like, why is no one here yet? I thought we're having a party. He's like, well, we're here early to like set things up, and then people are coming. Made sense to me. So he takes me upstairs to give me this tour and he goes, oh, come in here. I want you to see with what we called the master bedroom, at that time. And it was wild. This was, and I think this was a popular design thing, like maybe in like the 80s or the 90s, where there was mirrors everywhere, mirrors on the ceiling. The whole several walls were mirrors, mirrors, the closets were mirrors, mirrors on mirrors on mirrors. And I'd never seen a room like that. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. And I blacked out between that time period and with what happened next. And I want to give a trigger warning here that this is going to be graphic content, and you make the decision if you want to continue listening, fast forward, or pause this if you're around someone that you do not want to hear graphic material. Before I get into this part of the story, I want to remind you to please write a Apple 5-star review of the podcast on Apple Podcasts and share it in your social media. And for every review, I will be donating $100 to an animal charity or organization that is helping all of the displaced animals and injured wildlife from these Los Angeles fires. If you are a Spotify listener or a YouTube watcher and you have no way of leaving a written Apple review on Spotify, you can tap the 5 stars. You can subscribe on YouTube, take a screenshot of the show, share it on your Facebook, Instagram stories. I'm at Project Me with Tiffany, or on TikTok at Project Me with Tiffany. And I will also count that as a review. You can share this episode, you can share this podcast to anyone you know and encourage them to write a review if they like the show, and I will donate $100. There is no cap to this, and I will be tracking the donations and sharing them on my Instagram stories. I came to when Jason was really angry that he was not able to fully get inside me. And he was really upset about it and yelling at me about it. And I was really confused. And he went in the bathroom and came back with that industrial strength pink soap, which triggers a PTSD flashback for me to this day. And he put that all over me, which, as you can imagine, burned tremendously. And I remember it felt like I was being lit on fire, and used that as lubricant. And then I went out of consciousness. I know that one of my earrings, and I remember it was my right earring, I had studs in that were my favorite. And I know that was ripped out of my ear, and I became fixated on it, probably as a way to dissociate with what was happening. I wanted to make sure I didn't lose that earring. And then I opened my eyes and I remember seeing myself getting raped through all of these mirrors, from the ceiling to the right of me, to the left of me, even down by my feet, there was a full length, like, closet mirror. So from all of these angles, I was watching myself like I was in some like weird circus situation, seeing myself getting raped. And it was far obviously too traumatic, where then I obviously blacked out again. And then the next time I came to, he finished his business. He got up. I was just laying there like lifeless and my crotch on fire. And he said something to me like, come down when you're done. And like in a tone like that, like basically like, you worthless piece of shit. And I was alone with myself, with all of those mirrors around me, and all I could do was be worried about my earring, which is what happens in a traumatic situation. I was never able to find the earring, and it was really upsetting to me. And it was very upsetting to me for many, many, many years. And I kept that other earring until, I would say, not that long ago, maybe 7 years ago, was when I finally was ready to cut that final cord from being raped and got rid of that other earring. And I had jeans. I remember I was wearing that. And remember, I snuck out. I had no other way of getting home. There were not Ubers. I probably had enough money on me. I don't know, though, to get a taxi. I don't know. And I didn't have a cell phone. So I'm in the middle of some other suburb that I never had even heard of. So he was my ride home. So I knew, once again, I had to play whatever part I had to play to make fucking sure that he dropped me off at home. So one, I didn't get caught from sneaking out and ruin my freedom of the sneak out plans. And two, I had no one to call. I literally had no one to call. I couldn't call my dad, because even though my dad would have gotten me immediately, my dad was so terrified of my mom, he would have told her immediately. I knew I couldn't call Adam, because in his mind, that would be me cheating on him, and I'd pay a price for that. I obviously couldn't call my mom. I didn't have any friends' parents who I trusted enough that wouldn't tell my mom, because most people, literally all people, were enamored and mesmerized by her and worshiped her. So I was on my own. And he did drop me off at home. Thank God. I never talked to this person again, but I had to sneak back in my window after being raped this entire time. That industrial strength pink soap was all over my privates. And because I was sneaking back in my window, it wasn't like I could go and take a shower and make noise. So I remember that I had to wait, change into pajamas, and then act like I was just going pee in the middle of the night, and use toilet paper and tissues and water to try my best to get this stuff off me. And I remember laying back down in my bed, and it was like, I was despondent. I couldn't sleep. I was in like a freeze state. Thank God I finally made it back here. I'm safe, but I'm also not safe here. And it's not like after that occurred where I didn't want to be around guys. I didn't want to have sex with guys. I didn't want to date guys. No, it was the opposite. But I then wanted to be in control. It was like Tiffany's stripper persona really came to life, where it was like, I wanted to dominate the guys. I wanted to be, promiscuous. I wanted to entrap them. I wanted them to worship me. I wanted to be in control, like sexually. in that way. And so my sexcapades through rest of high school, through college, through my 20s were a lot, a lot going on. And it gave me a sense of power in a weird way, where it was like I knew that I was in control, or at least I made myself believe that I was in control. And I broke up with people. I broke a lot of guys' hearts and did not care. Um, some of them I have made amends to, even like as I was in recovery, like later in life, because that felt good. It was almost like I wasn't victimizing them. I wasn't doing that, but it was almost like I felt like I had the upper hand, which is why I so understand. And I have coached and worked with and have been friends with many strippers and sex workers. I understand. And the fact that I am not right now off working a pole somewhere, or that I didn't end up, in some foreign country dead, or doing some kind of insane, dangerous sex work is beyond me. That's God, because I was absolutely set up for that. But on the other hand, I was also doing sex work daily in my home. So, what's the difference? At some point in my sophomore year of high school, I did share with my best friend what happened. And it was interesting when I look back, because I could share that I was raped. That was easier and didn't have the shame. But I couldn't share anything else that was going on in the home. And I didn't. I didn't for many, many, many years. And even now, when I'm sharing about this, it's much easier for me to talk about being raped than it is for me to talk about the level of sadistic daily abuse and the sexual abuse and all the involvement of my mom and these other men and nuances. But I at least was able to tell someone, and someone who actually listened to me. And then there was like a high school boyfriend that I was able to tell this to, who was another guy who was older, who was over 18, that my mom allowed me to date. And he was like, I think he was like 19. He might have even been 20. And he was like my significant high school boyfriend. Like the rest of me being 15, or that summer, 16, 17. I even, left college and broke up with him before I left for college. I think he even visited me in college. And he ended up working for my mother's company. In fact, his direct supervisor was Adam, but he had no idea what was going on. Zero. What he did know was I was able to have someone to truly like vent to about like my mom and all the stuff. And I was able to have like a reprieve from that, someone to kind of help me stay out of the house as much as possible, because he did know how to charm my mom, and plus he worked for her probably for very cheap, and she liked that, and he was a good worker. So he was even allowed to sleep at the house. Adam did not like this. Adam did not like Kevin. I can say Kevin's name. I know he does listen to the show, and he's been an integral part of my healing process because he has an unusual photographic memory. So he's been able to fill in a lot of gaps for me that I've not been able to. Plus, he knows the parties at play, and there's very few people who know these parties at a very, close proximity. He worked for my mom for many, many years. I mean, even like, I think in my 20s, he was still working for her. He might have even worked for her for 10 years. And Adam, like he was working under him. And Kevin was always around, and I wanted Kevin around because when Kevin was around, Adam wasn't going to abuse me. But I also had to manage appeasing Adam, Because if I didn't give Adam enough of what he wanted with the girlfriend experience, that wasn't going to end well for me because Adam had some kind of an in with my mom that none of us have ever been able to confirm why. But just if I were to say who could influence my mom the most, it was him. And I have my own theories on this that I have shared on some other people's podcasts. One of them is the Mental Illness Happy Hour with Paul Gilmartin. It is a top mental health show, and you can look for my episode on there. And I don't want to share those pieces right now in this book, but you can kind of get some theories, right? I don't have evidence of that. So I had Kevin around me as much as possible, but I also would have to make sure I was going out with Adam, which then irritated Kevin at times. Like, not because Kevin was jealous of him, but it was like he wanted to hang out with his girlfriend, right? Like, it was understandable, but I kept positioning Adam as my brother, you know? So it had to be that way. And all this time, all through high school, I am doing the girlfriend experience with Adam. I am going to concerts. I am going to clubs. I am going to lounges. I am going to high end, trendy restaurants. Like all of the things, plays. I mean, theater. I mean, all of it is happening. And Adam is giving me Valentine's cards and stuffed animals. All this is all in front of my mom. All of it. And in front of, quite frankly, a lot of other adults too who didn't do anything that I'm aware of. The only person that became more vocal was my granny nanny. And I was aging out of needing her, and she became more and more vocal and being concerned about Adam's behavior. Like she had witnessed him grabbing my butt. She'd witnessed him grabbing my boob. She'd witnessed him force cracking my knuckles and stuff like that. And then there was no more of her. Like it's like she vanished. And then I found out in college that she was dead, like long after the fact. And this is someone who was there since I was a baby. So my guess is she needed to go. She needed to be kept separated. And I had no way of contacting or communicating with her. And being juggling all of these people in all of these different roles. Plus, I had to maintain, I believe it was a 3.2 grade point average in my boarding school, or you're kicked out. So I had to do that. You also had to play two sports in this boarding school, and you didn't want to be like horrible at sports. I wasn't top tier, but you didn't want to be horrible because that would just not be good in terms of like your social life. So then I had to do that role. Then I had to do the friend role at work. And then I started working outside of my mom's business and the other things my mom had me do starting at 15, which was another saving grace. That's when I first worked at a music store, but then my love is working at Starbucks. And those of you who are longtime listeners of the podcast, and I talk about like how that was like literally my favorite job. I think it was also my favorite job because I was earning my own money. I was outside of the house. And because my mom's a workaholic, I could always use work as an excuse to not be around. That was always acceptable. Work, homework, or anything to do with being skinny, i.e., exercising. And I knew that about her, so I used those constantly. It couldn't be having fun. It couldn't be resting. It couldn't be a hobby. It had to be one of those three things. And I just felt like such a grown up. It was such a great escape. And I will always forever love Starbucks for that experience it helped me be able to have more sneak out plans. It helped me with more freedom. Even though I was being required that all of those checks go into a checking account that she had control over, I still was able to like have the cash tips. I was able to have friends come in and visit me there, and then we could make plans. While we were there, I could take breaks with certain people. So it gave me more freedom, and I found ways just like a warrior would. You know, we there was I would hit this roadblock and this would happen to me and that would happen to me, and then this would start feeling like I had a sense of safety and that would be ripped away. But I always was determined and resourceful to always find a way to feel like I had some sense of control and some sense of relief and some sense of reprieve. And I made sure to find it. And that muscle within me is so well developed that even though I'm never going to be someone who says, oh, you know, I'm so thankful all of this happened to me, you know, in my life because it's made me who I am today. I think that's bullshit. I am not thankful any of that happened to me or anybody else, but a gift. There are gifts in all situations. The gift that came out of that is my level of resilience, my level of survivalship, my level of being a fucking warrior and a leader. That muscle's so developed that it has served me greatly in my adult life and entrepreneurship and coaching people and leading teams. It has served me even being able to stay alive now and managing my complex PTSD and major depressive disorder and being able to, when shit hits the fan or even having these horrific fires that are happening in Los Angeles, I am able to find different ways to survive, find a way out, come up with a creative solution to backdoor something, to have a plan A, B, C, D, E, and F, because that is simply how my brain works. And yes, that's a gift in it. And it also comes at a big cost because that's exhausting on someone's nervous system, on your hormonal system, to have cortisol pumping through you constantly, being hypervigilant, being prepared for a disaster and abuse all the time, managing all these people's expectations, needs, and desires, and keeping everybody happy. And I was able to do that for a long time until I wasn't anymore. And that's where I feel we should end this chapter. You're a goddamn warrior. If you're alive right now in your life and you've gone through some shit, it doesn't have to be the shit that I've went through. There's no comparison. Whatever you've gone through, you're a damn warrior because you're here and you are continuing to fight. And I want you to know how seen, heard, and understood you are, that I know that there's a lot of you listening where every single day it takes at least 50% of your energy to show up and be alive and participate in life. I understand that. And even on top of having to expend 50% of my bandwidth every day just to be alive and participate, I'm still able to thrive with the other 50%, even in spite of it, because nobody is going to tell me I can't. And that's why I always say, if it's possible for me, I promise you it's possible for you. You're a goddamn warrior, and I love you.